compliments to Tanya and Teresa for putting together a set of 3 papers that, at least for me, had a surprising beginning, middle, and an end. And I'll tell you what mine was. So, starting with Chris, my takeaway from that was, and what I liked the best, was his recognizing that when it comes to connecting research and practice, there's a supply side issue, there's a demand side issue. Most of the time we spend criticizing the supply side. There just isn't the research that we need. And that's a fair criticism, but there's also a demand side, you know, do we have people in education who are looking to research as one of many possible sources of inspiration. Then when Peg, my takeaway from her was her research-based knowledge design. And what she reminded me with this is that most of the utilization of research is not done consciously by the people who are actually in the classroom utilizing it. They're using research-based tools and curricula and practices without knowing whether they were based on research or not. That wasn't what was authoritative for them. But these were materials and tools that were put in their hands that they found useful and effective. Still, they were based on research. I'm reminded of a story. I used to live in Michigan for quite a while, and there was a person there was a lab serving that in Seminole. It was a Seminole lab. Maybe it wasn't their area, but anyway, there was a guy there, a congressman, who wanted to quit funding the regional educational laboratories, and he said, "How many of you have ever heard of a lab or used any of their products?" And nobody. There was probably 500 or so teachers and educators, leaders that nobody had. Nevertheless, they had adopted Seminole Math, which was a research-based curriculum. There's no reason why they should have known that was research-based or lab-based, but still they were using it. So thank you for that, Peg. And with Carrie, describing Massachusetts, I'm right back to the demand side of the equation. Actually, the story she tells is the most aggressive use of research that I'm familiar with. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, because the other day somebody was asking me, how is it that students in Massachusetts outperform those in Connecticut? We know there's more money in Connecticut. And I didn't know the answer to it, and I know. Massachusetts uses research more than Connecticut, so that's on the that's a good thing. But then she wanted to make it all the way around to 360, so she ended with the supply side of the equation by giving good advice to researchers about what they ought to be doing. So to me, this was a very nice story, and we have time for a question or two from the audience. Who would like to ask one? And I'll refer it to the panel. Yes, Nora.
Hi. So a lot of the discussion has been about the use of research. And, a consistent thing that people bemoan in schools is, the researchers come in, they gather the data, they go out and publish it, what's the matter, they're not asking the questions we want to get asked. And indeed, there's a lot of discussion about flowing in the other direction. And schools asking questions now, researchers may say, I can't answer that question, and be able to tell you why. But what are your thoughts about establishing a partnership with a two-way flow?
Everyone's looking at me now, right? So, is this on?
Yes, it is on, but you have to get a little bit closer.
A little closer?
Yeah,
okay.
Perfect.
I think those kind of partnerships can be really great under certain circumstances. So, to me, I feel like most critical is that the researchers actually listen to the practitioners about what they want to have answered. I find so often the exact experience that you're describing in districts I have at the state, and that's fine to a point. I think there's quite a bit of value in doing basic research that eventually will affect policy or will affect educational practice. But figuring out a way to have a collaboration between the two is, I think, much more challenging. I know the part of the U.S. Department of Ed that funds education research has been prioritizing this kind of work in the last couple of years, and so I think we'll have some lessons learned soon on that, but I don't know that we have a great model that works well for that yet.
All right, we have time for another question. Look at us being punctual here. Harris.
So I sort of ask, I'm puzzled by something. The preliminary map coalitions that Chris showed us suggested that folks with different political agendas are going to be using the research created by different intermediary organizations. And I'm sort of wondering how that plays out in different state departments of education, different places. Because it would suggest that if people are pulling from one side rather than another, it would suggest some bias in the way it filters down into policy and practice. I'm curious about how that plays out from the researcher perspective or from the state policy perspective.
Closer.
Closer, okay. So by the time we were looking at the use of research in school improvement, it had somewhat been, quote unquote, depoliticized, because the federal government was already saying, if you're failing school, you must do 1, 2, 3, or 4. They were more sort of implementing policy than they were in making policy. So I think it really becomes going from implementation to what is a highly charged policy decision. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie, because teacher evaluation has certainly been a hot button issue in a lot of states.
Admittedly, we're looking at an area that's very politicized, these incentivist policies. That said, something Peg said when she was up there, as far as a lot of university-based researchers, they do it and expect people to come to them. And there was one of the informants at the National Academies used basically that term. He said, we produce a report, we throw it over the wall and assume people are going to jump to it. That was their term, throw it over the wall. Where you look at a lot of these, I think, newer organizations, which they don't necessarily have the research capacity that might be desirable in policymaking, but they have the promotional abilities, and throwing something over the wall is as far, so they put out some stuff that's sometimes questionable, definitely agenda-driven, but boy, they know how to hammer it home. They have a lot of their coalition partners in a concerted effort to promote it. Very good in old and new media doing this, and I think university researchers and other researchers who might not necessarily have those kind of incentives need to think about that. I mean, in a sense, we're being peripheralized by people that are agenda-driven.
Carrie, you get the last word.
My favorite, excellent. I think part of the job of either an agency leader, in my case, my commissioner is appointed, not elected, or an elected official, is to know what perspective people are coming from. Everyone has a perspective. Everyone has an angle on whatever they're trying to represent, and part of the job is to factor that in as you're considering it. So I guess I'm less bothered by there being, people who are coming from particular agendas. Perhaps it's because I work in a state where I do think we're fairly even-handed and try to look at a broad range. It might be different in a more politicized environment, but I think that's my commissioner's job, is to sift through that and figure out the best path forward.
All right, well, let's thank our panel.